The first time Hannah Voss saw my son's photo taped inside my locker, she didn't ask about my wife. She asked what his favorite color was. That was the moment I should have known this woman was dangerous in a way I wasn't ready for. My name is Ryan Mercer. I'm 36 years old, and for the last 2 years, I've been raising my son Eli by myself. His mother, my wife Sarah, died in a car accident on a rainy Tuesday in March, coming home from a shift at the hospital where she worked as a nurse. One second she was texting me that she'd grab milk on the way home. The next second, a truck ran a red light, and I was a widower with a 4-year-old boy who kept asking when mommy was coming back. I work as a shift supervisor at a distribution warehouse on the edge of town. It's not glamorous. It's forklifts and inventory sheets and break rooms that smell like burnt coffee. But it pays the bills, and more importantly, it let me keep a schedule steady enough to be home for Eli every night. That mattered more to me than any promotion ever could. Hannah started working there about 8 months after Sarah died. She got assigned to my team, doing quality checks on outgoing shipments. She was 28, quiet in the way people are when they're used to being underestimated. With dark hair she always kept in a low ponytail and a habit of double-checking everything twice, even things that didn't need checking once. The other guys on the floor noticed her right away. I noticed her too, but I wasn't looking. I wasn't anywhere close to looking. For the first few months, she was just Hannah from receiving. We talked shop. She asked good questions during training. She laughed at my terrible jokes about pallet jacks, which nobody else on the floor found funny anymore because I'd told them 100 times. She was easy to work with. That was all I let myself notice. Then one afternoon in the break room, she was scrolling through her phone with a tired look on her face, and I asked if everything was okay. She hesitated, then told me her car had finally died for good, transmission gone, not worth fixing, and she'd been taking 2 buses and walking 20 minutes to make her shift every day for 3 weeks straight. That's rough, I said. It's fine, she said, in the voice people use when it is not fine at all. I'm saving up. I've never actually bought a car before. I always just inherited whatever my dad was done with. I don't even know where to start. I don't know why I said what I said next. Maybe because Sarah used to say I couldn't watch anybody struggle without trying to fix it. Maybe because helping people was the only thing that still made me feel useful outside of being Eli's dad. Either way, the words came out before I thought them through. I can help you look, if you want. I know enough about cars to keep you from getting ripped off. Hannah looked up at me with an expression somewhere between surprise and relief. You do that? It's not a big deal, I said. I've bought and sold a few. I know what to check under the hood, what red flags to walk away from. She smiled, a real one, not the polite work smile she usually gave people. Okay. Yeah. I'd really appreciate that. That should have been the end of it, a coworker doing a coworker a favor. Instead, it became something else entirely. We started meeting on Saturday mornings to go look at listings. I'd swing by her apartment in my truck, and we'd drive out to whatever used car lot or private seller had posted something in her price range. She brought coffee every single time, remembering exactly how I took mine after the second visit, black with 1 sugar, which was one more detail than most people bothered to remember about me since Sarah died. The first few cars we looked at were disasters. One had a check engine light the seller swore was just a sensor thing. One had rust eating through the frame that the photos hadn't shown. One smelled so strongly of cigarettes that Hannah started coughing before we even got the door fully open. Each time, I'd walk her through what I was seeing, why we were walking away, what to watch for next time. She took notes. Actual notes, on her phone, like she was studying for a test she refused to fail. You don't have to memorize all this, I told her once, laughing. That's kind of the point of me being here. I want to know it myself, she said. I don't want to need someone every time something goes wrong. I want to understand it. That answer stuck with me longer than it should have. There was something in the way she said it, independent, but not closed off, that reminded me of the kind of person I used to be before grief made me smaller. Somewhere around the 4th Saturday, Eli started asking to come with us. I'd mentioned Hannah's name at dinner a few times, just casually, the way you mention any coworker. But 6-year-olds notice more than adults give them credit for. Is Hannah nice? He asked one night while I was cutting his chicken into smaller pieces. She's nice, I said carefully. We're just helping her find a car. Can I help too? I'm good at looking at cars. I laughed, and something in my chest went soft and worried at the same time. Maybe next time. Next time turned into the following Saturday, when I picked up Hannah with Eli buckled into his booster seat in the back, chattering about dinosaurs before we'd even left the driveway. I watched Hannah in the rearview mirror as she twisted around in her seat to actually engage with him, asking follow-up questions about which dinosaur was his favorite and why, like his answer genuinely mattered to her. By the time we reached the first lot, Eli had already decided Hannah needed to know his entire ranking system for dinosaurs by threat level, and Hannah had already decided the Stegosaurus deserved better than 4th place. I stood there next to a Honda Civic with a for sale sign taped in the window, half listening to their argument, half wondering when exactly my son had decided to fall for someone I was still telling myself I wasn't falling for. She's fun, Eli whispered to me later, while Hannah was inside talking to the seller. Can she come again? We'll see, buddy. That means yes, he said, grinning like he'd won something. He wasn't wrong. Over the following weeks, Hannah became a regular fixture, not just on car hunting Saturdays, but in smaller ways too. She started bringing an extra granola bar to work, just in case Eli needed a snack when I picked him up early from school on half-days and brought him by the warehouse office. She asked about his teacher, his friends, the picture he'd drawn that I kept taped inside my locker. She remembered things about him the way she remembered how I took my coffee, like storing details about people wasn't a chore for her, but something she genuinely enjoyed doing. One evening, we finally found the car. A used sedan with low mileage, a clean history report, and an engine that ran smooth when I tested it. Hannah stood in the lot with her hands pressed against her mouth, staring at it like she couldn't quite believe it was real. This is it, she said. This is actually it. Test drive first, I reminded her. Don't fall in love before you've driven it. She laughed, shaky and bright. Too late. We drove it around the block together, me in the passenger seat walking her through the feel of the brakes, the turning radius, all the small things a first-time buyer wouldn't think to check. When we got back to the lot, she signed the paperwork with hands that trembled slightly, and when the seller handed her the keys, she turned to me with tears standing in her eyes. I couldn't have done this without you, she said. I mean that. You would have figured it out eventually. Maybe. But I didn't have to figure it out alone. That mattered. I didn't have a good response for that, so I just nodded and told her congratulations, and we stood there in that parking lot a beat too long before either of us moved. That night, after I'd dropped Eli off with my mother for a sleepover and was driving home alone, I let myself think about it honestly for the first time. I wasn't just helping a coworker anymore. I hadn't been for weeks. And somewhere in the middle of test drives and dinosaur rankings and remembered coffee orders, Hannah Voss had become someone I looked forward to seeing more than I looked forward to almost anything else in my life. That scared me more than it excited me. Sarah had been gone 2 years, but grief doesn't work on a calendar. Some days it felt like 10 years. Some days it felt like 10 minutes. I still wore my wedding ring some mornings out of habit before catching myself and sliding it back into the drawer. I still reached for my phone to text her something funny before remembering there was no one on the other end anymore. Falling for someone new felt less like moving forward and more like admitting Sarah was truly, permanently gone, and I wasn't sure I was ready to admit that out loud. But Eli had already decided. That much was clear. The trouble started, the way trouble usually does, with someone who'd been quietly keeping score the whole time. Her name was Denise, and she worked in HR at the warehouse. She was in her 50s, sharp-eyed, and had known Sarah personally, since Sarah used to bring me lunch sometimes and stop by to chat with the office staff. Denise had never said anything unkind to me since Sarah died. But she also hadn't said much of anything at all, treating me with the careful, distant sympathy people reserve for widowers, like I was something fragile that might shatter if handled wrong. She noticed Hannah and me before most people did. And she didn't approve. It came out on a Thursday afternoon, when Hannah had stopped by my office to drop off a signed form and I'd made some easy joke that made her laugh loud enough to carry down the hall. Denise happened to be walking past at that exact moment. She didn't say anything then. But an hour later, she found me alone in the break room and closed the door behind her, which was never a good sign. "Ryan, can I speak frankly?" Sure, Denise. She crossed her arms. I've noticed you and Hannah have gotten close. We're friends, I said. She's a good coworker. That's not what I'm seeing. Her voice wasn't cruel, but it wasn't gentle either. I knew Sarah. I watched you two build a life together. And I have to say, it feels fast, moving on this quickly, bringing her around your son. Something in my chest tightened, defensive and raw. It's been 2 years, Denise. I know how long it's been, she said. I'm just saying, be careful. People talk. And Eli's already lost one mother figure. You don't want him getting attached to someone who might not stick around. I wanted to tell her that was none of her business. I wanted to tell her that Eli had already gotten attached, weeks ago, over dinosaur rankings and Saturday car hunts, and that pretending otherwise wouldn't undo it. But instead I just said, I appreciate the concern, in the flattest voice I could manage, and left the break room before I said something I'd regret. The thing about small workplaces is the same thing about small towns. Word travels fast, and it rarely travels kindly. Within a week, I could feel the shift, sideways glances, conversations that stopped a beat too quickly when I walked into a room. Someone had apparently told Hannah, too, because she started pulling back, small ways at first. She stopped bringing coffee. She stopped stopping by my office just to talk. When I asked if everything was okay, she gave me a tight smile and said she was just busy. I let it go for a few days, telling myself it was nothing, that I was imagining the distance. But Eli noticed too. Is Hannah mad at us? He asked one night, poking at his dinner instead of eating it. No, buddy. She's just busy at work. She hasn't texted you funny car videos in a while. I hadn't realized he'd been paying attention to that detail. I hadn't fully realized how much he'd absorbed about Hannah's presence in our lives until that moment, sitting across from me with his small face pinched with worry that someone else he loved might be slipping away. That was the night I decided I needed to actually talk to her, not dance around it anymore. I caught her the next day near the loading dock, during a lull in the shift. She was doing an inventory count that didn't need to be that precise, the same overchecking habit she'd had since her first week. Hannah, can we talk? She kept her eyes on the clipboard. About what? About whatever's going on. You've been avoiding me. She set the clipboard down and finally looked at me, and I saw something tired and guarded in her expression that hadn't been there a few weeks earlier. Denise talked to me too. About the whole office thing. About Sarah. About how it might look. And she's not wrong to worry, Ryan. I'm not trying to insert myself into your family. I never meant for this to become something people whisper about in the break room. Hannah, I don't care what people whisper about. I do, she said, quieter now. Because if this ends badly, it's not just you who gets hurt. It's Eli. And I refuse to be someone who hurts that little boy because I couldn't keep my feelings professional. There it was, out in the open for the first time. Feelings. I stood there in the loading dock with forklifts humming somewhere behind us, and I finally said the thing I'd been avoiding for weeks. What if I told you I don't want you to be professional? What if I told you I've been falling for you since that first Saturday you tried to argue with a stranger about a check engine light? Hannah's breath caught. Ryan. I'm not asking you to fix anything, I said. I'm not asking you to replace anyone. I'm just telling you the truth, because you deserve the truth more than you deserve me pretending this is nothing. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. Then she said, quietly, I've been terrified of exactly this. Not because I don't want it. Because I want it too much, and I don't know how to want something that comes with that much weight. A child who already lost one mother. A ghost I can never compete with. A whole office watching to see if I'll be the woman who ruins the grieving widower's life. You're not ruining anything. You don't know that yet. No, I admitted. But I know I'd rather find out with you than keep pretending I don't want to. She looked at me for a long moment, eyes bright, and finally said, okay. Let's find out. Slowly. Carefully. On our terms, not Denise's. That should have been the turning point where everything got easier. Instead, it got harder before it got better. Denise wasn't the only obstacle. My mother-in-law, Carol, Sarah's mom, had remained close to Eli and me since the accident, watching him on weekends, showing up for birthdays, keeping Sarah's memory alive in a way I was grateful for even when it was painful. When she heard, through the same gossip pipeline everyone else had, that I was seeing someone from work, she called me that same evening, her voice tight with hurt she was trying hard to disguise as concern. "Ryan, is it true? You're seeing someone?" "Carol, I'm not trying to control your life," she said quickly, cutting me off. "I just need to understand where this leaves Eli. Where it leaves me. I've been such a big part of raising him since Sarah passed, and I don't want to lose that because some new woman decides she wants a fresh start with a ready-made family." Her words hit somewhere raw and unfair, but I understood the fear underneath them. Carol had lost her daughter. Watching another woman step into that space, even carefully, even respectfully, must have felt like losing her all over again. "Carol, nobody is trying to replace Sarah. Nobody is trying to push you out. I would never let that happen, and neither would Hannah. You don't know that. You barely know her." "I know her better than you think," I said, more firmly than I intended. "I've watched how she treats Eli when she thinks nobody's paying attention. I've watched her remember every small detail he tells her, twice, because she actually cares. That's not nothing, Carol. That's everything." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, softer, "I just don't want him hurt again." "Neither do I. That's exactly why I'm being careful." The conversation ended without resolution, but it opened a door that had been closed. A week later, I asked Hannah if she'd be willing to meet Carol properly, not as a secret, not as gossip, but as an introduction on my terms. Hannah went pale for a second. "That feels like a big step." "It is a big step. But you said you wanted this slow and on our terms. This is part of doing it right." She agreed, nervous but resolute, and we set up a simple dinner at my house the following Sunday, Eli included, because pretending he wasn't the center of this entire situation would have been dishonest. That dinner could have gone a dozen different directions. Carol arrived stiff and formal, her guard visibly up the moment she stepped through the door. Hannah, to her credit, didn't try too hard. She didn't perform warmth or overcompensate with forced cheerfulness. She simply helped set the table, asked Carol genuine questions about Sarah, actually listened to the answers, and let Eli be the bridge he naturally wanted to be, showing Hannah his latest dinosaur drawing while asking Carol to confirm which dinosaur mommy used to like best. Somewhere around dessert, I watched something shift in Carol's expression. Small, but real. Hannah had asked her, quietly, if she could tell her more about Sarah sometime, not to replace her, but because she wanted to understand the woman who had shaped both Ryan and Eli into who they were. "You want to know about her?" Carol asked, surprised. "She's part of this family," Hannah said simply. "I'm not trying to erase that. I couldn't if I tried, and I wouldn't want to." Carol's eyes went wet, and for the first time since Sarah's death, I watched her look at someone new in our lives without fear underneath the surface. That dinner didn't fix everything overnight. Denise remained cool at work for a while longer, though eventually even she softened once she saw how careful and respectful Hannah remained through it all. Rumors faded the way rumors do, replaced eventually by newer gossip about someone else entirely. But that dinner marked something important. It was the night Carol stopped seeing Hannah as a threat and started seeing her as someone who genuinely wanted to protect what Sarah had left behind, rather than erase it. Months passed. Hannah became less of a presence in our lives and more of a fixture, showing up not because it was a special occasion, but because it had simply become normal. She'd swing by after work some evenings, helping Eli with his reading homework at the kitchen table while I made dinner. She learned his bedtime routine, the specific way he needed his stuffed dinosaur positioned before he'd actually fall asleep, the exact number of night lights required to keep the monsters away. She never pushed to be called anything specific. She let Eli set the pace entirely. That pace accelerated on its own one evening, months later, when Eli came running into the kitchen while Hannah was helping him with a puzzle on the living room floor. "Dad!" he shouted. "Dad, come here." I hurried in, worried something was wrong, only to find Eli standing there with a huge, nervous grin, Hannah frozen on the floor beside him looking somewhere between amused and mortified. "What's going on?" "I asked Hannah something," Eli announced, "and I need you to hear the answer too." "Okay," I said slowly. "What did you ask?" Eli looked at Hannah, then back at me, practically vibrating with 6-year-old seriousness. I asked her if she wanted to be my second mom. Because I think she'd be really good at it. The room went completely silent. Hannah's face had gone red, caught somewhere between laughing and crying. I stood there stunned, watching my son casually detonate the exact question I'd been too scared to ask out loud myself. Eli, I started, that's not really. It's okay, Hannah interrupted softly, her eyes still locked on Eli. I want to answer him. She knelt down to his level, taking both his small hands in hers. I would be so honored to be your second mom, Eli. But that's a decision your dad and I need to make together, when we're both ready. Can you understand that? Eli nodded solemnly, like he was negotiating a very serious business deal. But you want to? Right. Hannah looked up at me then, over Eli's head, and I saw the truth sitting plainly on her face, unguarded for the first time since the whole thing started. Yeah, she said, still looking at me. I really, really do. That night, after Eli was finally asleep, Hannah and I sat on the back porch steps, the same way we used to sit in parking lots after failed test drives, except this silence felt different. Heavier. Fuller. I never planned this, she said quietly. I just wanted to buy a decent car without getting scammed. I never thought I'd end up here, being asked by a 6-year-old if I wanted to be his mother. Does it scare you? Terrifies me, she admitted. Not because I don't want it. Because I want it so badly it feels reckless. I've fallen for a package deal, Ryan. Not just you. Him too. And I don't know how to want something this much without being afraid of losing it. Welcome to parenthood, I said, only half joking. That fear doesn't really go away. You just learn to want the thing anyway. She laughed, wet and real. That's terrible advice. It's the only advice I've got. She leaned her head against my shoulder, and we sat there a long time, watching the porch light attract moths in slow circles, neither of us needing to say anything else. The proposal, when it finally happened almost a year later, wasn't dramatic. There was no crowd, no elaborate setup, no speech rehearsed 100 times in a bathroom mirror. It happened on an ordinary Saturday, the same kind of Saturday we'd spent driving from lot to lot looking for a car, except this time we drove to the same used car dealership where it had all started, parking in the exact spot her sedan had been sitting the day she bought it. Why are we here? She asked, confused, looking around the lot. I got down on one knee right there on the cracked asphalt, Eli standing beside me grinning so wide it looked painful, holding the small velvet box I'd let him carry the whole drive over because he'd insisted it was his job as best assistant. Hannah, you came into my life trying to buy a car, and somehow you ended up buying your way into something I didn't think I had left to give. You didn't just help me remember how to move forward. You helped Eli remember what it felt like to have two people who'd fight for him no matter what. I don't want careful anymore. I don't want slow. I want you, permanently, officially, as my wife and as his mother, if you'll still have both of us. Hannah had both hands pressed over her mouth, tears streaming freely, nodding before she even managed actual words. Yes. Obviously yes. 1,000 times yes. Eli cheered loud enough that the dealership staff came outside to see what the commotion was about, and ended up cheering along with us once someone explained what had just happened in their parking lot. Denise, of all people, cried actual tears when I told her at work the following Monday, admitting quietly that she'd misjudged how quickly love was supposed to move, that watching how gentle and careful Hannah had been the entire time had changed her mind completely. Carol cried too, but for entirely different reasons, telling me later that Sarah would have loved Hannah, would have approved completely of someone who cared enough to ask permission before claiming a title as important as mother. We got married the following spring, small ceremony, close friends and family only. Eli served as ring bearer, though he insisted on also being called chief inspector, carrying the rings in a tiny toolbox instead of a traditional pillow, because in his words, important stuff needs proper tools. During the reception, Hannah gave a short toast, holding her glass toward Eli specifically. 2 years ago, I couldn't afford a decent car and didn't know the first thing about buying one. A coworker offered to help, and I thought that was the whole story. Turns out, it was just the beginning. Because somewhere between test drives and dinosaur rankings, I found the family I never knew I was looking for. Eli, Thank you for asking the question I was too scared to ask myself. I promise I'll spend every day proving your instincts were right. 2 years after that, we had a daughter together, Eli's little sister, whom he insisted on personally naming after his favorite dinosaur species, a battle Hannah and I ultimately lost with good humor. Eli became, by his own declaration, the world's most qualified big brother, a title he took as seriously as he'd taken his role as best assistant during the proposal. Sometimes, late at night, Hannah and I still talk about that first Saturday, the dead transmission, the granola bars, the parking lot where I taught her to check for rust under wheel wells while she pretended she wasn't already starting to fall for the guy explaining it. She says she still can't believe something as small as needing a ride to work turned into an entire family. I tell her it wasn't small at all. It was just the first honest thing either of us let ourselves want in a long time. Carol still comes over every Sunday. She and Hannah bake together now, trading stories about Sarah freely, without fear, without competition, two women who love the same family in different seasons of its life. Denise sends Christmas cards every year, always signed with some version of "So glad I was wrong." And Eli, now 8, still occasionally reminds Hannah that the whole thing was technically his idea, that he saw it coming before either of us did, back when we were just two adults pretending a used sedan was the only thing changing in our lives. He wasn't wrong. He just understood it faster than we did. What would you have done if your 6-year-old asked the question you were too afraid to ask yourself? And have you ever helped someone with something small, only to realize much later it had quietly become the most important thing in your life? Tell me your story in the comments. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.